I never thought a single text would shatter my marriage and rebuild my life. When an unknown number sent me a photo of my wife wrapped around another man, I didn't confront her. I didn't cry. I started planning a revenge so thorough it would leave them both with nothing. And I'd walk away with everything they thought I'd never have the guts to take. I used to think betrayal was something that crept up on you over months or years, a slow erosion of trust, a gradual unraveling of small lies. But in reality, it took exactly one text message to demolish the life I thought I was living. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon in Seattle. I just wrapped up a strategy meeting, exhausted but satisfied, and was driving along Interstate 5 when my phone buzzed in the cup holder. The screen showed an unknown number. I wouldn't have answered, but something about the timing made me curious. I picked up the phone at a stoplight, expecting a wrong number or maybe a robocall. Instead, I saw a message that knocked the air out of my lungs. If you want to catch your wife cheating, come to Bellwether Bar today at 6 p.m. Below the text was a single photo. At first, my brain refused to process it. The angle was slightly tilted, as if taken quickly from across the room, but the subject was unmistakable. Madison, my wife of 8 years, sitting far too close to a man I'd never seen before. She was leaning in toward him, her hand resting on his leg in a way that made my stomach turn. I forced myself to look at the timestamp. Taken that morning. There was no room for excuses or explanations about old pictures or misunderstandings. I felt my fingers tighten around the steering wheel until the leather creaked. The light turned green. I didn't move. For a few seconds I honestly thought I might throw up right there in the car. But something else rose to the surface instead, something cold and strangely steady. It wasn't heartbreak. Not yet. It was clarity. I'd suspected Madison was hiding something for months. The sudden late nights, the guarded phone calls, the way she'd grown distant even when we were in the same room. But I told myself it was stress or burnout or just the natural wear of years together. I wanted to believe that so badly I'd ignored every sign. Now I didn't have to wonder anymore. At the next exit, I pulled off the freeway and parked under an overpass. I stared at the message, then at the photo, then at the message again. If I went home, she'd be there waiting with some story, some excuse about a work project or a client dinner. If I confronted her unprepared, she'd find a way to spin it. She'd always been good at spinning things. I didn't want a confrontation. I didn't want to fight. I wanted proof. So I called the number back. It rang twice before going to voicemail. No name, no greeting, just the automated system. Whoever sent this didn't want to be identified. Part of me wondered if it was a prank or someone trying to stir up trouble. But the photo felt too real. And deep down, I knew it was real. I looked at the clock. 3:27 p.m. If I left now, I'd have time to go home, grab my old DSLR camera, and find a spot in the bar where she couldn't see me. I'd have time to get the kind of evidence no one could deny. For a long moment, I sat there, listening to the rain tapping the windshield. In another version of my life, I would have driven home, confronted Madison, and demanded answers. I would have raised my voice, maybe cried, and told her how much she'd hurt me. But I was done being the husband who didn't see what was right in front of him. At 3:35, I started the engine and turned toward home. My mind was already outlining a plan, where I'd park, which angle of the bar offered the best view, what I'd do if she tried to leave early. I felt strangely calm as I drove. The part of me that wanted to scream was still there, but it was buried under something harder. Determination. Resolve. If she was going to throw our marriage away, I was going to make sure she didn't get to walk away clean. When I reached the house, I didn't bother looking for Madison's car. I knew she wasn't there. I went straight upstairs, took my camera from the closet, and checked the battery. Fully charged. In the kitchen, I wrote a note to myself on the back of an old grocery list. Just a single sentence. Don't react. Record everything. I folded it and put it in my pocket. By 5:15, I was sitting in my car across the street from Bellwether Bar, the engine off, the rain still falling in sheets around me. Every few minutes, I checked the camera, then checked my phone, then looked at the bar's front door. I felt like I was preparing for a stakeout, like a private investigator in some low-budget detective show. It should have felt ridiculous. But all I could think was that this was the only way to be sure. At 5:50, I locked the car and walked across the street. My hands were steady as I pulled open the bar's door. The moment I stepped inside, I knew everything was about to change. I didn't expect Bellwether Bar to feel so ordinary. The way people tell it, life-changing moments happen in dramatic places, somewhere upscale or hidden away. But the bar was nothing special, which somehow made it worse. Just a neighborhood spot where people grabbed cheap drinks after work, where no one paid attention to strangers sitting alone. That was exactly what I needed. I picked a corner booth near the far wall. From there, I could see the entrance and most of the tables without having to move. A server glanced over. I ordered a soda, pretending it was just another Thursday night. My heart wasn't racing anymore. It had settled into a steady rhythm, the kind that comes when you've accepted that there's no turning back. At 6:03 p.m., the door opened. Madison walked in. Seeing her in person was worse than the photo. She moved like she didn't have a secret, like nothing was about to implode. She scanned the bar, then smiled when she spotted someone behind her. That was when Tyler stepped in. I didn't recognize him at first. It took a few seconds for my mind to connect his face to the corporate profile I'd seen in company newsletters. Tyler was one of the partners at the investment firm my company worked with. He wasn't just some stranger. He was a man I'd shaken hands with at conferences. A man who'd once told me he respected my work ethic. It was almost surreal. They didn't sit in a hidden corner. They didn't look around to check if anyone was watching. They settled into a booth 2 rows in front of me, turned slightly away. Madison leaned toward him, said something I couldn't hear, and laughed. She looked happy, completely unburdened. I raised the camera and started recording. I zoomed in, checking the focus. Madison's hand was already on Tyler's arm. His hand brushed her cheek. I thought I was prepared for it, but watching her touch him that way made me feel like I'd been punched. Still, I kept the camera steady. If she'd looked over her shoulder, she would have seen me. But she never did. She was too absorbed in her own performance to notice anything beyond her little circle of stolen intimacy. I recorded the moment Tyler leaned in and kissed her. That was all the confirmation anyone would ever need. But I didn't stop filming. I kept the camera trained on them as they ordered drinks, as they laughed at whatever private jokes they'd been collecting behind my back. 20 minutes passed. I didn't even sip the soda in front of me. My only thought was, this will end tonight. At 6:25, they stood. Madison pulled her phone from her purse and checked the screen. She said something to Tyler and reached for his hand. I snapped 3 final pictures, each clearer than the last. When they turned toward the door, I waited 5 seconds to make sure they wouldn't see me, then slipped out the back exit. The air outside was sharp and wet. I didn't go home. I drove to Rachel's office. Rachel was the only person I trusted to see what I'd collected. She'd handled the contracts for my prenup and knew every line of it. If there was a path to ending this without leaving me at a disadvantage, she'd find it. When I arrived, she was still there, working late as usual. She took one look at me and must have seen something in my face, because she didn't ask questions right away. She just motioned for me to follow her to her office. I placed the camera on her desk and pressed play. She watched the footage without interrupting. When it ended, she looked up. "This is exactly what you need," she said, her tone even. "You don't have to confront her directly. You don't have to give her a chance to manipulate this." I nodded. My throat was tight, but not with regret. "We'll file quietly," Rachel continued. "She'll get served, and by the time she realizes you knew, your accounts and assets will be secured." I'd always thought that if this day came, I'd feel grief or rage so big I wouldn't be able to function. But sitting across from Rachel, I just felt hollow relief. This was happening, and I was ready. When I left her office, the rain had stopped. I sat in the car, letting the silence sink in. My phone buzzed. A text from Madison. "Hey, working late. Want me to grab takeout?" The gall of it almost made me laugh. I didn't answer. Instead, I drove home. Inside, the house was exactly as I'd left it. Perfectly arranged, everything in its place. It felt like stepping onto a stage set, an illusion of stability that had been cracked beyond repair. I walked through each room, checking the details that used to comfort me. The bookshelf we'd built together. The framed photos from vacations that now felt like someone else's memories. It was astonishing how quickly something could lose all meaning. By the time I reached the bedroom, I knew I wouldn't sleep, so I turned on my laptop and started searching. I checked her email. She'd never bothered to log out of her account on our shared computer. There it was, a thread of messages with Tyler. Plans. Reservations. A list of dates that matched perfectly with the weekends she told me she was catching up with an old friend. I opened a new document and started copying everything. Screenshots. Timestamps. Any evidence that proved she hadn't just slipped once, but had built a separate life. One she'd hidden with practice skill. By the time the sun rose, I had everything I needed. The next step was clear. Secure my finances, prepare the filing, and make sure Madison never saw any of this coming. For the first time since I'd received that text, I felt something almost like peace. It wasn't over, but it had begun. By Friday morning, I had turned the fragments of Madison's deception into a complete timeline. Every meeting, every message, every hotel reservation she'd booked under her name. The reality was worse than I had imagined. This wasn't an affair that happened once or twice in a moment of weakness. This was a calculated arrangement, built over months. And she had used me to make it easier. She'd borrowed my laptop to order gifts, but really she'd been downloading sensitive documents. She'd used my work trips as cover to meet Tyler in hotels across the city. I spent the day closing every vulnerability she could exploit. First, I called my bank and set new security questions that only I could answer. Then I removed her authorization on every joint account. Rachel helped me file to temporarily restrict any large withdrawals. By noon, Madison couldn't touch $1 without my knowledge. I changed the passwords to our cloud storage and set alerts for any login attempts. When I saw 3 failed logins that afternoon, her trying to access our shared folder, I knew she had realized something was shifting, but she still didn't suspect how much I already knew. At 3 p.m. I made a call I'd been considering since the night before. Dana answered after the second ring. She sounded tired but composed. "This is Dana." I didn't waste time. "I think we need to talk about our spouses." There was a pause on the line, no gasp, no denial. Then she said, "I'm listening." I told her everything I had. The photos, the videos, the emails. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she was silent for a moment. "Email everything to me," she said. "If he thinks he can embarrass me in front of my children, he's going to regret it." I sent the files. Less than 10 minutes later, her reply came in. "Let's finish this together." That was the moment I knew Madison and Tyler had underestimated the people they betrayed. Later that afternoon, Madison texted me again. "Can we have dinner tonight? I feel like we've been out of sync lately." I almost admired her nerve. She'd been with Tyler the night before, and now she was trying to act like the devoted wife. I replied, "Sure, let's talk." If she wanted to play pretend, I'd let her. It would make the truth land even harder. I spent the next few hours preparing. Rachel had drafted the divorce filing. All that was left was to serve her. When Madison came home, she was cheerful. She didn't notice how still I sat while she talked about her long day. She didn't ask why my responses were so measured. At dinner, she leaned across the table and touched my hand. "I miss how close we used to be." I nodded. "I've missed you too." I didn't feel a thing when I said it. When we finished eating, she reached for her phone. I knew who she was texting. I waited for her to put it down. Then I looked her in the eyes. "You know," I said evenly, "you were always terrible at covering your tracks." Her hand stilled. "What?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "You really think I didn't notice the meetings? The trips? The way you suddenly needed to borrow my laptop all the time?" Color drained from her face. "You've been with Tyler," I continued, "and you were so sure I'd never find out. You thought you could walk away from this marriage and still come out ahead." She opened her mouth, but I kept going. "I know everything, Madison, and so does his wife." The silence that followed felt heavier than any argument. She finally said, her voice low, "You don't understand." "No," I said. "You don't. You don't understand that I'm not the man you thought you could lie to forever." I stood up. "Enjoy the rest of your evening." I left her sitting there without another word. When I got home, I locked every account she had access to and forwarded the final version of the divorce filing to Rachel. The next day, the fallout began. At 9 a.m., my company's leadership team received an anonymous tip, courtesy of Dana, documenting Tyler's conflict of interest, his use of internal information, and his personal entanglements. By 10 o'clock, there was an emergency meeting. I sat in my office, sipping coffee while Tyler tried to explain himself. Through the glass walls of the conference room, I could see his composure slip. Madison started calling me around noon. I didn't pick up. She left voicemails I never listened to. At 2:30, Dana sent me a video she'd recorded that morning. Tyler, standing in their kitchen, begging her to reconsider. She panned the camera to show the papers she was holding. Evidence of every reservation, every message, every expense he'd hidden. Her text simply said, "We're almost there." That night, Madison came home. She didn't say anything at first. She just stood in the doorway, watching me pack the last of my things into boxes. Finally, she spoke. "Please, can we talk about this?" I looked at her. There was no anger left in me, only finality. "You made your choice," I said, "and you're going to have to live with it." I walked past her without slowing down. I spent the night in a hotel. I thought I'd lie awake, going over everything again and again. Instead, I slept straight through until dawn. When I woke up, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Relief. The game was over. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't have to pretend anymore. The morning after I left Madison at the house, she tried to call me again. I watched the screen light up 6 times in a row before I turned the phone face down. Each call felt like an echo of a life I no longer belonged to. By 10 a.m., Rachel confirmed the divorce papers had been served. Madison was officially notified. She could no longer pretend nothing had changed. At noon, I received a message from the bank confirming that all shared accounts had been frozen pending separation of assets. I knew it would catch her by surprise. She'd assumed she would have time to quietly move money or build leverage. But she underestimated how much I'd prepared. Around 2 p.m., I stopped by the house one last time to collect anything that was legally mine. Madison wasn't there. The place felt hollow, like it was waiting for the truth to settle in. I walked through each room without regret, picking up a few files, my personal devices, and the last things I hadn't already taken to the storage unit. Before I left, I placed a printed letter on the kitchen counter. In it, I listed the steps I'd taken. The freezing of accounts, the legal filings, the removal of her access to anything she could claim ownership over. At the end, I wrote, "You don't have to contact me. All communication should go through my attorney. This is the only fair ending to the life you decided to end yourself." I locked the door behind me. That evening, Dana called. She didn't waste time on small talk. "It's done," she said. "I met with the board this afternoon." She explained that she'd presented every document and video to the company's leadership. There was no way for Tyler to deny the relationship or the conflict of interest. He had used confidential business information to set up meetings with Madison. He had used company credit cards to pay for some of their trips. At 5:30 p.m., he was officially removed from all partnership agreements. His name was taken off contracts and his access to internal resources was terminated. Dana didn't sound triumphant. She sounded tired but resolved. "Thank you," she said quietly. "If you hadn't told me, I would have kept believing his excuses." I thanked her back. She had done the part one couldn't have pulled off alone. We hung up without promising to stay in touch. We didn't need to. We'd both gotten what we came for, the truth and the consequences. That night, Madison sent her first real apology. It was a long email full of justifications. She claimed she hadn't meant for it to get this far. She said she still loved me and that we could work through this if we just had space to talk. I didn't reply. Instead, I archived the message and flagged it in the folder I'd created, Documentation, Madison. I knew she wasn't done trying. Over the next few days, she called, texted, and emailed repeatedly. Every attempt followed the same pattern. First denial, then remorse, then anger, then back to pleading. I kept every message. I didn't respond to any of them. Meanwhile, word spread through the company that Tyler had been let go. I received several polite emails from colleagues asking if I was all right. I kept my replies short. Yes, I was fine. No, I didn't need anything. The truth was I was more than fine. I was relieved. By the end of the week, Madison's access to the house was formally revoked. The locks were changed. She no longer had authorization to enter. I paid movers to pack her belongings and deliver them to a storage unit she could access when she was ready to collect them. Rachel handled all the logistics. I didn't have to speak to Madison once. On Friday afternoon, Dana texted me a final update. She had filed for divorce. Tyler had moved into a hotel. He tried to convince her it was just a mistake, that he was confused. She sent me a transcript of his voicemail. "I never wanted to hurt you. I don't know what I'm doing. Please, just call me back." Dana's only comment was pathetic. I agreed. That weekend, I booked a short trip to Portland. I needed to be somewhere else for a few days, a place that didn't remind me of the last 8 years. I turned my phone off and spent 3 days walking through unfamiliar streets, letting my mind go blank. When I came home, there were 19 new emails from Madison. The last one simply read, "You win. I have nowhere to go." I read it twice before closing my laptop. It wasn't about winning. It was about refusing to let someone keep lying to my face while expecting me to pretend I didn't see it. The final step was the legal separation of our assets. The prenup protected everything I had built before the marriage. She was entitled to a settlement but nothing more. She tried to argue for a larger share. Rachel shut it down in a single meeting by presenting the evidence of her affair. Even her own attorney advised her to accept the terms. By the end of the month, the agreement was signed. I never saw Madison in person again. The day the divorce was finalized, I sat alone in my new apartment. It was smaller, quieter, and still smelled faintly of paint. For the first time in years, I felt no obligation to keep up appearances. No expectation to play the role of the forgiving husband. No burden to carry someone else's deceit. I poured a glass of water, sat by the window, and watched the evening traffic move past. It wasn't a victory parade. It was just peace. And that was enough. 8 months passed before I heard Madison's voice again. It came through as a voicemail late one night while I was sorting old papers. I let it play all the way through without stopping. "Logan, it's me. I know you don't want to hear from me, but please just listen. I messed up. I don't know where to go. Tyler won't answer. I'm staying on a friend's couch. I don't even know how to start over. Can you just call me back? Even if it's just to tell me you never want to hear from me again." I sat still after it ended. In another life, that message would have destroyed me. I would have rushed to call her, to reassure her, to fix the situation she created. But this wasn't that life anymore. I saved the voicemail not out of spite, but as a reminder of what I'd chosen to leave behind. Over those 8 months, I had rebuilt my routines one deliberate step at a time. I sold the house. The sale closed faster than I expected, and the profit was enough for me to buy a smaller place in a quieter neighborhood. There was no one to tell me how to arrange the furniture or where to hang pictures. The freedom felt unfamiliar at first, but I never questioned whether I'd made the right choice. At work, things changed in ways I hadn't planned for. Tyler's removal left a gap in the partnership. My department absorbed part of his role temporarily, and I was offered an opportunity to oversee new projects. I accepted. It wasn't about ambition. It was about proving to myself that I was capable of standing on my own without being defined by what Madison had done. Sometimes people in the office would still talk about the scandal in hushed tones, as if I might break apart if they brought it up. But I didn't feel embarrassed anymore. I hadn't been the one lying. A few weeks after the divorce finalized, Dana invited me to a small launch event for her nonprofit. She'd used her settlement to start an organization helping women who'd been financially and emotionally manipulated by partners who thought no one would ever challenge them. She named it Restored. The launch was held in a modest event space. There weren't photographers or reporters, just a room full of people who knew exactly why she was doing it. When Dana stood to speak, she didn't mention Tyler by name. She didn't have to. Everyone understood. After her speech, she found me near the back of the room. "Thanks for coming," she said. "I'm glad you invited me. We couldn't have done this without you." I shook my head. "You did all of this yourself." She smiled, but her expression was serious. Sometimes it takes someone else refusing to look away for you to finally see what's in front of you. I understood exactly what she meant. When I left the event that night, I felt something close to closure. Madison continued trying to contact me periodically. Emails, voicemails, the occasional letter. The pattern never changed: apology, then blame, then desperation. I never replied. My attorney forwarded any necessary communication to me. But there was nothing left to discuss. The divorce had been final for months. The settlement was paid. The accounts were closed. All that remained was the part of her that couldn't accept it was over. Some evenings, when I sat in my new living room, I would look around at the bare walls and uncluttered spaces and think about how much energy I used to spend trying to keep everything together. Trying to convince myself that things would get better if I was just patient enough. In reality, the only thing holding me back was the hope that she would change. Letting go of that hope freed me more than any legal document. One Saturday morning, I finally listened to the rest of the voicemails she'd left. Each one was saved in a folder I hadn't opened in months. I sat at the kitchen table, playing them in order, listening to the same excuses, the same regrets. By the last message, I felt nothing except relief. I selected all of them and hit delete. That small act felt final in a way the court papers hadn't. The following week, I got an email from an old friend who had moved to Colorado. He invited me to visit for a long weekend. I booked a ticket. I didn't tell anyone I was going. I didn't feel like I owed anyone an explanation anymore. When I boarded the plane, I didn't think about Madison or Tyler or the life that had ended. I thought about the fact that for the first time in nearly a decade, I was doing something entirely for myself. And I realized that was the lesson I'd needed all along. Betrayal doesn't have to define you. It doesn't have to ruin you. Sometimes it's the only thing strong enough to force you to stop living in someone else's shadow. When the plane lifted off the runway, I looked out the window and felt grateful not for what had happened, but for what it had revealed. The lies had collapsed. The illusions had burned away. All that remained was the truth. And the truth was this: I was finally free.